Waiters in expensive restaurants. What are the best high-class snooty people insults you've received? I used to bartend at a high-end golf club. This one really stands out for some reason. Customer: did you go to public school? Me: yes. Customer: yeah. I can tell. Dude was a big dick. Did you inherit your money? Yes. Yeah. I can tell. A girl I know got screamed at for not opening the mustard she served. She works in a relatively posh place. And the mustard comes in this little individual glass pot, I think Coleman's or whatever. She hadn't opened the mustard for them and was yelled at. I work for local paper, they will be hearing about this. I've never been so offended. Disgusting behavior. She just stood there aghast and like, did you want me to open the mustard? Now? More yelling. I was 21 bartending in a snooty restaurant often frequented by yachties. Oh, you look about my daughter's age. Except she's away at college. A career is really important to her. I was graduating that year and off to grad school the following year. Wow. That's great. Another Grey Goose? I worked at a country club in Texas for 4 months. I asked a customer who was fairly drunk if needed anything else besides his next apple whiskey drink. He said, "Some air that lacks the stink of welfare." You should have told him to change that for you and give you a few hundreds to rub all over yourself. Oh, he wasn't talking about me. He was eyeing the pretty black waitress who was tending the champagne booth. That dude pissed me off. But I had to smile at him, fake laugh. Else I'd have been fired for disrespecting the clientele. Never had a problem with customers at high-class restaurants. They always want to impress their partner's associates, so even if they try and be mean I usually still get an awesome tip. They could shove a barb broomstick up my nose. If I'm getting 20% on a $325 dinner, I don't care. $60 in exchange for an old lady telling me our coffee tastes like sheet is okay by me. Worked a banquet hall at a wedding as my first job and a guy once called me an imperious cretin. To this day I'm trying to think of a better insult, nothing yet. I work in a snooty people grocery store. So hopefully this counts. Once when I was ringing a rich lady's groceries, she took a look at my name tag. I've got a fairly normal name, but it's spelled creatively comma, and she said it's surprising you could get a job at all with a name like that. I know I've got a stripper name. It wasn't my choice. I pay more in tax than you earn in a year. He was probably right. That's not hard to do. I basically make nothing face. Not a waiter. But one old guy next to me wanted to pay his meal. He was there with 4 other people. The waiter asked him if he wants to pay with debit card or to pay in cash. Old guy answered, "I only pay with debit card for things above 5,000 euros in the nastiest tone possible. In other words, I carry 4,999 euros on me at all times. Please jump me after I leave. Geez guys. Sorry I used the wrong symbol. Not all of us have studied world currency." I worked valet for about a year at a really classy hotel downtown. We routinely had Mercedes, BMWs, Range Rovers, football players' candy-colored cars, Porsches, etc. Pretty much any kind of high-end non-sports car. I drove. One time, a guy pulled up in a decent Mercedes. Not an AMG or anything super high dollar. He seemed cool at first. But after I gave him the valet claim ticket, he casually went to his backseat and retrieved a newspaper. As I still holding the driver's door open, he starts disassembling the newspaper like he was about to clean up cat piss off the hardwood floor. Once he had 4-5 single sheets of newspaper, he began setting the newspaper on his driver's seat, as to protect it from my apparently dirty ass. He didn't even have to say anything. And it was the rudest insult I had ever received. Few years back, I used to work in a Thai restaurant. Pretty fancy one. It was a slow night on a Tuesday. 2 girls with Hermes bags came in and ordered a bottle of Riesling. I went to their table to check on them and they wanted me to take their pictures. As I was about to grab her phone, she said, "That LV iPhone case worth more than what you make in a month. So be careful. People with real money never mention brand names like that." I'll bet she was up to her assigned credit card debt. My uncle worked in an upscale place in Boston for years. One night Mel Blanc came in. My uncle didn't recognize him. When my uncle came over to the table to take the entree order, Mel Blanc looks at my uncle and in a perfect Bugs Bunny voice says, "Well, Doc, I'm certainly not having the rabbit. I can tell ya that." I greeted some older woman after their meal and asked, "Did you enjoy meal, ladies?" One of them replied that their dog ate better food at home. I had no response for this and hurriedly gathered up the rest of the plates and left. The plates were all empty. I'm an event chef for a fine dining catering company. The wealthy tend to treat me well and with respect. They tend to understand that you treat other humans with respect. Especially the one in the chef's coat and hat handling your food. The most snooty customers are the ones that want to be wealthy. They're usually upper middle class and think that this is how the wealthy treat the help. Best insult I've had is with another company where I got a $2.50 tip. Chefs get tipped too, for the whole night. Somehow worse than no tip. Edit, spelling error. This lamb isn't properly butterflied, you're a moron. I love the transition from the subtlety of the complaint itself, which is relatively petty, to the abject bluntness of the end. It's all tied together by disproportionate outrage, which is the lifeblood of this kind of thing. A++. On the contrary, the wealthiest, most high-class couple I ever served offered me a glass of their $150 bottle of wine and a seat at their table to talk about my life and what I want to do with it after I'm done working at the restaurant. We talked for over an hour. It was my last table of my last shift. Awesome people. Some richies aren't that bad. A true high-class person would never stoop to insulting a waiter. It's a waste of wit. What they do instead is explain to you in the most condescending way imaginable how you have failed to do your job by not telepathically intuiting what they wanted without them having to go through the bother of actually articulating it. Honestly, you can never find good help these days. Not a fancy restaurant, but a fancy lady in a nursing home I worked at. Being a nesting ground of old gossips, she was at a table with some other barbarous women. One of them pissed her off. To which she said, "I would call you a dog, but that would be an insult to the loyal creatures everywhere. And I would call you the other bit, but unlike them I was brought up far better than that." Used to work in a high-end tea room, and we had this regular who was an absolute itch. I was on my knees cleaning up a drink that another customer had spilled and the itch needed to get past me. I said, "Sorry, I'm almost done." And she said, in the most condescending way possible, "That's quite alright. I like having people at my feet." Cater waitering a very elite wedding in Manhattan. A young boy asks his grandfather why someone might choose to be a waiter as a job. Old man explains that some people choose not to get an education beyond high school and so they can only get jobs like these. They were bothfully staring at me, less than 20 feet away. Not a waiter, but I delivered flowers to the town Hillary Clinton lives in. I had a huge vase, so the lady let me in to put it down. I said, "Wow, nice place." She said, "If you went to college you could get one like it." I told her I was, and she said community college doesn't count. Few months later she shows up to my school with her freshman son to the criminal justice orientation at the fancy-ish school I went to. Her face was bright red when I said I was a student mentor. Brought waters and menus, did the welcome speech, and asked if they'd like to order drinks right away. The man glared at me and told me that I'd have to do better than that if I expected a tip. He wanted the best service. I was a little befuddled, smiled and said that I'd do my best to make his visit an enjoyable one. Do you know WHOIAM? When I admitted that I did not, he was really offended. He then informed me that he was a professor at the community college the next town over. Seriously? The community college? His wife was shushing him and face palming like crazy. Poor woman. We had Toby Keith in our private dining room once as he would come into our place every time he was in town. One of my server assistants who was pretty young was pushing a cart of whiskey bottles and the cart fell over right in front of him. He said, "Hey you, why don't you pour me another drink before you clean up that mess you made?" His tone was awful and it irked the shit out of me. She started crying out of embarrassment, fear, and he turned to me and said, "Why don't you go pour me a drink then?" Retail in a super rich neighborhood. Most people are nice, but the snootiest ones won't return a smile, say hello, or even make eye contact. Like they are disgusted you exist, but they have to go through the indignity of talking to you to buy things. If you butter them up enough they'll thaw a little and start being nice to you. But you have to do the monkey dance first. I don't really care. Work me isn't real me. Just a couple days ago I was serving a very important business meeting. Important enough to where one of the gentlemen flew in from Hong Kong for it. I guess they left some documents on the table that got thrown away and they came back in a couple hours later frantically looking for them. Pulled me aside and said, "Look, I make more in a week than you do in a year. Find me those papers or I'll have you shining my shoes just to make a little extra." Many wealthy people call the not us people the help, or helpers, or assistants, etc. Then encourage their children to order their helpers around and praise them for their leadership skills and delegating. Watching the face of a 50-plus-year-old man subtly change when getting direction from a 8-year-old really bothered me. Source: dated a 0.1%. I work at a pretty high-class seafood restaurant in Rhode Island, and one evening I had a table of people that I assume were not from around there considering their accents. I went to clear their table. All of them had some form of a lobster dish. And one of the men complained that the lobster was not fresh and was frozen. I politely informed him that the lobster was never frozen. He was very adamant that he was the correct one. So I said sorry and walked off. And I passed my manager and mentioned it to him and he said, "Go back to that table and tell them we have 250 pounds of fresh ducking lobster every day." So I went back and told them again. Politely. And once again the gentleman was still convinced the lobster was frozen. One more time I told my boss and he just stormed off to come back 5 minutes later with a cardboard box full of live lobster and said, "Go show those duckers." One last time I walked out to them and set down a box full of 10 or so lobsters and said, "See? Fresh." And the guy's dumbstruck face was so satisfying. Tip: not so satisfying. Not a restaurant situation, but I think it applies. I umpire Little League Baseball and was calling a game between a couple of pretty snooty leagues. After I called strike 3 on a kid, the mom yells from the stands, "Don't worry honey. He's just some fat loser with nothing better to do." I looked back to see who said it and saw that she was a young, hot mom, about 35, who clearly prided herself on how she looked considering she was pretty dolled up for her kid's game. Between innings I leaned back against the fence and said to her, "Mom, these are children. I'd expect a woman in her 50s to have a little more class than that." Edit: update because multiple comments asked. Afterward that her heckling got worse, louder, and more frequent. I've been doing this for many years so I can tune someone out when I want. But her kid definitely didn't get the benefit of the doubt on any other close calls that game. I work at a country club. This one lady comes in every weekend for breakfast and sits there for hours until her husband and his friends are done golfing. A couple weekends ago, she said her omelette tasted like chloroform. I just want to know how she knows what that tastes like. I mean, I work in a Chili's and got called a naught once. I come from an upper middle class background. My dad always taught me to never, ever be rude or complain. If you didn't like it, be nice. Smile. Say thank you and never return. Had some friends that worked at a super expensive restaurant in Boulder, CO. It was on top of a mountain and overlooked the town. One of the waitresses told me that an older couple go there at least twice a month, sometimes weekly. She overheard them talking about they like looking down at all of the trash or something like that. Good tippers though. Apparently. Honestly. The really rich people are usually nice enough, they come in often and tip well enough to make up for it if they aren't. Sometimes we get less affluent people in and they're the most demanding. I think because they don't dine in high-end restaurants, maybe, they want the most bang for their buck. But yesterday while I was serving him wine, a guy gave me a talk about how all Chianti is at least 80% Sangiovese and that actually sulfites in wine don't cause flushing, and that's a common misconception. Don't worry. I did feel talked down to them. A very wealthy couple I was friends with some years ago offered to take me to legendary top star Italian restaurant in the city with my best friend and her husband. They offered to foot the whole bill since there's no way I nor my friends could afford that, not poor but solidly middle class with tons of debt. I would have never guessed that my best friend would be so affected by the experience. She turned into a different person. She told the waiter she didn't understand why she needed a menu when they should just intuitively design her food experience for her. I thought I would die of embarrassment. Got to hand it to the waiter though. He said very well ma'am. Took the menu and came back with a plate of spaghetti and meatballs for her. We all laughed our asses off. At the restaurant I worked at, and everywhere I've ever worked in the US, managers get really angry if you don't pre-bus the tables. Which is just always be removing empty plates once people are finished. I guess it's sort of old school rude to clear plates unless everyone at the table is finished. As this one time I asked if I could take the 3 ladies' plates out of their way while the older man happened to still be eating. He looked at me said, "We do not clear the table until everyone is done. Go." It was humiliating. And I'll never understand why people allow their friends' family members to speak to others that way. Not waiter. But at a country club dinner with millionaires. We were talking about the Bears while they were playing and he said something about Matt Forte not being thrown to enough. I said I believe he's their number 2 for targets receiving yards if not mistaken, at that time in the season. Snooty dude says who the duck are you again? I went red. Embarrassed and kept quiet the rest of the time. He kept saying who the duck are you? Over and over as tequila after tequila went down. I finally got pissed and looked it up on my phone. And showed it to him while everyone went off. He got pissed and got quiet. Later he loosened up and said it one more time who the duck are you again? But this time in a joking, laughing manner trying to blow it off. I replied with a guy with a job. I found out a few days earlier he got canned for drinking on the job.